Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of MTE's Mobile Education Series, powered by the Rag Company. We have live education every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern, and today we have Bud Abraham, who's going to tell us about paint. So Bud, I'm going to bring you in. Hey Bud, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Gentlemen, thank you for having me.
So we actually have a pre-recorded edition of Bud's education he's going to do. So we're going to go ahead and put that on. But then if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments, and Bud will get to them at the end for you. And of course, I did forget to say this. Thank you so much to the Rag Company for sponsoring this, and we couldn't do it without you. So I'm going to bring that video up here. Maybe. There we go. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. Bud and I will drop out, and we will catch you after the video.
All right, what is to go through the discussion of paint with you. Now, most of this material that I have comes from some of the paint companies and Ford Motor Company. Did anybody attend the paint session at the Nashville convention? Oh, good. Okay, well, this was a lot of the material that came to me through a gentleman at Ford Motor Company who's in charge of this area of their company. Okay, so we'll make it real simple. Now, a lot of this you don't need to know as detailers. It's just going to enhance your knowledge as a professional in the cosmetic car care industry working on paint. Okay, what is paint? It's a combination of solvent, resins, pigment, and additional additives to do certain things. And I won't read all of that to you, but that, it's pretty simple. It's a chemical formulation to do a certain thing. And it tells you, I'm sorry, am I blocking some of you? And it's intended, the pigment is the color, the resin provides the adhesive toughness, the durability, the gloss. Solvent is nothing but a carrier. That's all solvent's used for. Now, this is important for you to have knowledge about. What types of paint materials are used today? Now, OEM, or original equipment manufacturer, we're talking about the paint they use in the factory. It's thermal curing enamels and urethanes. Now, what that means is that paint has got to be heated in order to cure. If it's not heated, it won't cure. Now, they can get away with that because the cars don't have any plastic, rubber, glass, wiring, anything on them when they go through that process. Then they use a different paint, what they call OEM implant repair. Now that means that when the car comes off the end of the assembly line, if there's a flaw in the paint, they've got to repair it. Well, because the car now is all assembled, they can't use the thermal curing paint. So they use what they call an acid catalyst thermal curing paint. Now what that does is that reduces the temperature required to make the paint cure. All right, and then in the aftermarket, we use air dry and chemical curing enamels and urethanes. And I'll explain that with this next overhead, okay? Now here is an air dry or a soluble paint. You have the pigments, you have physically drying resins, and you have solvents, and you have an air dry paint. And so what you have down here in the left-hand corner is the wet paint and the solvent evaporating. So that's why you can't seal off a new paint finish. Even a chemically curing paint still has solvent in it. Now I hope that you're beginning to see where all of this knowledge is leading us as far as you as detailers. All right, now here is what we call an insoluble or a chemically drying paint. You've got the pigments, the solvents, but the resins in this case are chemically curing. And what we're saying is that when you spray this paint, when the oxygen hits the wet paint, it forms new molecules. So you get this like the hardeners, like the epoxy paints. Maybe that's the easiest way to put it to you. You mix the hardener together with the paint when you're ready to use it, and then it physically creates a new structure. Yes, Bob? 2K, thank you. Okay, I jumped ahead of myself a little. What are the differences then between these paints? OEM, as I said, they have to be baked at high temperature in order to cure. The OEM has to be baked in order to cure, but because of the acid catalyst, and I'm not sure what that's all about, but it lowers the required baking temperature, okay? And then in the refinish market, or in the aftermarket, we can only take a car up to 140 degrees, or simply air dry it. Now, what this all means, I think, to you, to us as detailers, is that we're getting cars that got different paints on them. 60% of the new cars that come from the factory today, I'm told, have been repainted somewhere. So when you pick up a delivered car at the dealer today, there's a good chance that it's got either in-plant repair or at the dealership repair. Now, the problem is that if they've not done a good job of repainting that car, refinishing it, you're going to see differences in the paint. People are going to come to you with paint problems that you can't correct because it's improper painting that was done. Or you've got 2 different kinds of paints, or in case 3 different kinds of paint. You could have 3 different kinds of paint on a new car. So you need to understand that so that you can explain. That's what I was telling some detailers in the detail shop at a dealership. I said, look, you guys have to understand this, because that used car salesman comes to you and demands that you repair this car and you can't fix it. And you've got to be able to explain to them or to your customer, retail customer, this knowledge. See, you're a better professional now because you know this. Okay, this is a little discussion of what they call the E-coat process. You may have heard that term, the E-coat, in the factory. They mount the car, they electrocoat it, they rinse it in a dipped cabinet, and then rinse it again. They put it on a dolly, and so forth. You know, that's the process that the car goes through in the plant. The E-coat is the primer coat that they put on the bare metal. Boy, I don't know. Well, I'm told that the manufacturers don't always use compatible systems. Yeah, I wasn't aware. I know that GM had a problem with paints. Ford had a big problem with their paints in '89 and '90. And the paints were just coming off the car after about a year.
In the late '80s, General Motors actually was experimenting with water-based paints, from what I heard. That's what caused a lot of the problems. They did it voluntarily. They had a big class action lawsuit.
That could be. Well, I know that I've read a lot about water-based paints. They're experimenting and they've had some success with the base coat being water-based. But all of the clears are still solvent-based. They can't come up with a clear coat yet that is strong enough to, with a water-based clear coat that will withstand what a clear coat has to withstand in the environment. So they're still basically, they may be using water-based, but it doesn't affect us. We're still dealing with a solvent-based clear. Okay, this is the process, the typical paint system in the factory. Number 1 is the bare metal, number 2 is the zinc coating, number 3 is the cathodic electrocoat of primer, then they put a stone chip primer, then your base coat, and then your clear coat. So that is the process that typically a car goes through in the factory. Yes, sir?
What year did they start the clear coat?
It's hard to say. The Japanese were experimenting with clear coats, as I understand, in the 70s. I don't know when the American manufacturers started doing it, but according to the man from Ford, everything after 1993 is clear coated. Okay, what are the paint systems used today? Now, these are the terms that we've been kind of throwing around all day here. We've got the mono coat or single stage. That's just the paint color and a clear resin are mixed together in the same layer of paint. That's our single stage paint. The disadvantage of the system, fallout, acid rain, can eat into the color and are very noticeable when contaminated. Currently, few manufacturers use this system. Ford used this system on pre-1993 trucks. So Ford was actually using clear coats on passenger cars before 1993. Now that's the paint system, of course, that will also oxidize in the traditional sense of the word. I got in trouble with a guy who was trying to catch me. He thought I was a know-it-all. And he said, I said that clear coats don't oxidize. Well, I was meaning they don't oxidize in the traditional sense of the word when we think of a single stage paint. You could call what clear coats do after a long time oxidation, but if I said that to you, it would confuse you. So I don't call clear coat the process that breaks down a clear coat oxidation, because we know oxidation to be that chalky, white, ugly color. And we'll talk about clears in a moment. Okay, I got this example for you to kind of see, basically what we've already said, that you've got a primer and a top coat. Typically, this paint system is 4 to 6 mils, depending on the manufacturer. That means 4 to 6 mils of film, not 4 to 6 mils of paint. There could be 2 to 3 mils of primer, and then the rest would be paint. Actually, there's not as much paint on today's single-stage cars as there were a long time ago, a few years ago. So they've learned how to cut back on the amount of paint that they use. Okay, now we have our base coat, clear coat, or two-stage paint. The top layer of paint is clear resin with an ultraviolet ray blocker. The color is protected below the clear coating. It's very glossy, doesn't require frequent polishing. 98% of the paint, according to this Ford man, is what's being used, paint systems are being used today. And in many ways, people, this is a godsend for us. It really is a godsend, because as I just saw in Denver, our detail jobs were so easy when we applied the proper procedures, not being too aggressive, not swirling and scratching up the paint because of wrong technology. We were able to whip through cars very, very quickly and still give the customer what they deserved and paid for. Okay, so what you have with a two-stage system is you have your plastic or metal finish, your primer, your base coat, which is the color coat, and you have the clear. Do you know how thick that base coat is? Anybody?
1 mil.
It's less than a mil. Less than a mil. A mil is 1,000th of an inch. A garbage bag, you'll see on the garbage bag boxes, 0.95. Well, that's about how much paint you've got on the car. Now that color, by the way, if you didn't know this, is dull. If you buff through the clear and you've got this spot of unprotected paint, you can buff like hell trying to get it to shine, and it's not like lacquer. It's not going to shine. You're going to have to get somebody over there quick with a paint touch-up system and spray that with clear, if that'll even correct the problem. Oh, sorry. Good question. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. The clear coat, this is the critical one. The OEM clear is only 1.5 mils thick. 1.5 mils. Now we'll go on a little bit later here and talk about the finishing procedures. Okay, then we have, and this is a real important one, we have the base coat tinted clear coat. Okay, this uses the pigmented or the base colored base coat on top of a excuse me, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I don't like the way he's put this in order. I like to go the other way. You have your base coat, and then what they do with the clear is they put tint in the clear in order to get some of these really interesting colors that the cars have got now. Now, care must be taken when polishing not to darken the color due to excessive cutting, film removal, or heat generation. So what Ford Motor Company is telling you, detailers, is don't buff on a tinted clear aggressively or you're going to cause some damage that you didn't even know was there. Tinted clear coat systems are used by all North American VO manufacturers. Now what that means is not every car has a tinted clear coat, but every manufacturer uses them to create certain colors. Yes, sir?
Can you go back just a little bit? You talked about a clear coat, and you talked about a two-stage. Are those two different?
Yeah, they're the same thing. Two-stage, I'm sorry, he asked to clarify terms. Two-stage paint system, base coat, clear coat system, they all mean the same thing. That's the base coat of color and the top coat of clear. And this last one I just had up there is also a two-stage paint, but it's a tinted clear, so it's different. Okay, here's another one. Have you ever heard of tri-coats? How many people have heard of tri-coats? Not many. Well, see, we're detailers and we don't know what we're working on. Actually, this paint system really doesn't affect you as a detailer, as long as the clear is not a tinted clear. Okay? Now, tri-coat is this, to make it easy for you, this is where the pearlescent colors come from. You know, the pearl white Cadillacs and Toyotas and things of this nature. Very simple. You have your base coat of color, then you have the next coat, which is the pearl or the translucent coating, then you have the clear coat. And most manufacturers have at least one color that uses a tri-coat. And you would follow, nothing to panic about, you would follow normal procedures. The only danger that I would suggest to you that you have is if you damage one of those, it's going to cost you a lot of money. Because I know a friend of mine got a damage in a Maxima that had a pearlescent. He didn't want to take it to a body shop. He went to the dealer, $650 to repaint the door. So that's why you've got to know what you're doing when you look after these paint finishes. Okay, there is again just a graphic picture of a tri-coat. The metal or the plastic, the primer, I don't know why they use the term ground coat, but that's the base coat, then the intermediate or the pearl coat, and then the clear coat. So you see, as far as you're concerned, the clear coat's all you're working on. That's a good question. That's what I was saying earlier. How do you tell if it's been tinted? I think what I'm telling you now, I don't have that information right now. What I'm telling you now is that you're going to have to, call the. I don't even sure the dealers know. Bob.
I know that Ford has quite a few, also Chrysler, and some of the time, I know one of the Ford Mustangs is very popular is laser red. That's a tinted clear coat. If you're uncertain, I think it's probably best to call the dealership and say, find out where the color is, and check with them. Is it Spain or whatever?
Yeah, I would think, as Bob said, Bob Gecko from LA, what I would do in your situation, I would call the dealer, ask if they've got a body shop, talk to the body shop manager. If he's not giving you an answer, and you can tell when a guy doesn't know, and many times they don't know. I would talk to him. I would call the paint distributors for BASF, for Axco Sikkens, Sherwin-Williams, DuPont. Search out that knowledge. They've got that information. They probably can tell you, well, in fact, I know they can tell you because the books, we have a paint touch-up system, and the books tell you. The paint system books that come, they can tell you if it's got that clear or not. You might even be able to buy a set of those books, or at least one of them that tells you the color of the paint. But you really need to know that. Okay, good question. Can body shops use the same paint as an assembly plant? No. Obviously, because we discussed that you've got to bake a thermal curing paint up to 240 to 300 degrees to cure. And as we said earlier, in the aftermarket, you can only bake a paint about 140 degrees. So it's a different paint system. And that's something to know about if a car's been repainted. I mean, that could be the source of a problem that you're trying to correct. All right, what temperature is refinished paint baked? As we said, 140 degrees. A vehicle can be baked in a spraying booth or a baking booth. Okay, body shops can use infrared light to improve curing, you know, those things that sit on the side of the car like heat lamps. The process works similar to a microwave oven, and as he says here, the equipment does not use temperature sensors. Okay, we can get into a little specifics now. I think you're real interested in what I've been alluding to. There are the thicknesses. Okay, this is typical of what you're going to find on most cars. The single stage system is going to have 3.5 to 4 mils of paint. A half a mil of E-coat primer, then the primer surfacer a mil, and then your top coat of about 2 mils. Not much paint on a single stage finish today. Base coat, clear coat, you've got your E-coat of a half a mil, your primer surfacer at a mil, the base coat at even less than 0.9 base coat, and then 2 mils of clear. And most of them are even less than 2 mils. So you don't have a lot to work with. They do. Let me get to that. I'll answer that in a moment. Okay, why is paint film thickness important? Well, obviously, we've alluded to that. Now, I think this is Ford's way of protecting themselves. They're saying that you shouldn't remove more than 0.3, a third of a mil. They're saying don't remove more than a third of a mil of clear, or you'll cause premature failure. Most paint companies will tell you a half a mil. Ford is doing this because of warranty. So they don't want to go on record as they're saying, we told you not to take that clear off, not to buff that car excessively. You know, this is our standard. But everybody says to me a half a mil. Okay, he's saying that the UV agents are concentrated in the top half mil of clear. So when you start to buff that off, you're actually taking the UV blockers that are in the clear coat off the paint finish, and you're going to cause premature wear of the paint. The UV blockers, by the way, are just like suntan lotion. That's what we're talking about, is a protectant that blocks the sun's UV rays.
You're saying they spray a different part of the very last step?
I'm sorry?
Are you saying that, like, if they were to spray 1 mil of a clear coat, that the last pass has a special?
I don't know. That's a good question. I just took that because I respected this guy and I didn't get a chance to ask him. I thought it maybe had something to do with the UV blockers rising, because it doesn't really make sense. What were you going to say, Joe?
I was going to say that's correct. Those UV inhibitors do rise.
They do rise. Okay, well that would make sense. I didn't think, someone said, well, that's stupid. You know, when they saw that, they thought it was stupid, and I really didn't have an answer because I just never thought to ask the guy. I was so enamored by all of his information, you know, that one passed me by. But that makes sense. I mean, this guy is a Sharpie. He's not a dummy. You know, the guy that gave this presentation, he's not a dummy. And so that would make sense that the UV blockers would rise. Now, here is, you're going to ask, well, geez, how are we going to know? Well, there's only one way for you to know how much clear is on that paint, on that car, and that is by a paint thickness gauge. Now, the electronic gauge he's saying is the most accurate. This is what we have right here. It's the same gauge. Now, this will measure into tenths of mils. So if you have an idea of how thick the paint is on a car, what it should be from the factory, then you can measure the thickness of paint on the car digitally, and you'll know if it's been buffed again, if you get inconsistencies. I mean, there's no other way for you to know that. This is the only tool that you could use to know where you were with the thickness of the paint and how much clear was left. That's the only tool I know. We've got the little handheld paint thickness gauge, but this is not very accurate. This will only tell you if a car has been repainted or not, because it's not quite as accurate as it's not anywhere near as accurate as the digital. These things you're probably going to ask me how much are they. I think they're around, I want to say $500 to $600. The digital. The handheld one is only $40. Excuse me?
What does it tell you how far the thickness of the paint? Because one side's thinner than the other side.
I didn't understand the
So
question.
you put it to the hood.
Yeah.
Say one side's been buffed, the other side hasn't been buffed. How would that tell you?
Well, it would you'd get a difference in reading. See, this is all the paint thickness gauge does is tell you the entire amount of film from base metal to the top.
Put it at, where would you set it?
Where would you put it? Anywhere you thought the car had been buffed. See, you just have to kind of pick and choose. You'll have to know. It's like locating gold. If you got a metal detector, you kind of have to have some idea where the gold's going to be, or you're looking for a needle in a haystack. The same thing with buried treasure. You got to have some idea where it is. So it's the same thing with a paint thickness gauge. You got to have some idea that you think the car has been buffed there, it's been repainted, and so you stick it there. And that's how I use them anyway. No, it has to be metal. Okay. Okay, another item that we have to help us with paint finish problems is a magnifier. This allows you to identify surface defects such as the depth of scratches. I'm not familiar with anybody know what IFO means? Fallout, industrial fallout. Okay, and overspray. And they just, I'll tell you, it's a great marketing tool. You pull it out and you look at a customer, what are you doing? Well, I'm taking a look at your scratches, Mr. Jones. I want to see how deep they are to see if I can get them out. And then you let them look at the scratches. And you can see them oftentimes. You can look at somebody was asking me about water spots. A lot of times people will mistake water spots for etching. And so they'll attack the paint as though the paint were etched. When as all water spots are just a concentration of minerals in hard water that dried on the car. And as all you have to do is re-liquefy them and you can take them off. And you don't need to buff them off. You'll damage the paint finish, which we'll talk about in a moment, being too aggressive trying to correct one problem and creating another one. But this magnifier will help you learn see if they're there. Okay, so we ended up, thank you for your patience, we ended up talking about that paint magnifier. Like I said, it's going to help you to identify certain paint finish problems, and it's great with the customer. I think it's even greater used with the customer than it is just for your own use to look at the paint. Somebody comes in, they got water spots, you don't know if they're water spots or they're etching. It's important for you to know the difference. Because if you take the car, the customer expects that you're going to remove those spots and it turns out they're etching, you can't do it. But he's coming back thinking that you're going to remove those spots. The paint thickness gauge should be able to tell you, the magnifier should be able to tell you whether you're dealing with etching or just water spots. Same thing with the depth of scratches. And if you have a paint touch-up system and you show a customer a paint chip under that magnifier, it'll scare the hell out of them. It looks like a crater on the moon or something is what a chip does. So it's a great way to show your professionalism, to help you identify problems, and to make the customer feel more comfortable in dealing with your company. How do you repair this? You probably can't tell what it is. Anybody know what that is? It's not a very good picture. It should be in color. Fallout. It's rail dust. It's rail dust. Iron filings or rail dust. Somebody said clay, but look at the second point says. Okay, rail dust, for those of you that don't know the terminology, when they ship cars from the factory on rail cars, you got steel wheels and steel rails, and it basically is wearing the metal off. It flies into the air. It lands on the unprotected horizontal surfaces of the car. The car gets wet in transit, either through dew or rain, and it rusts. And it actually burrows right into the paint. And then it bonds. I mean, it's actually bonded onto the car. And unfortunately, the only way to, now people think that clay works, but even Japan, where clay originated, where I get my clay from and some of the other major suppliers get their clay from, they tell you not to use it. They even say the same thing, because what the clay does is that it just breaks, they found that it just breaks the tip off. It doesn't necessarily pull the entire particle of iron out of the finish. So you may break it off, but it's still there and it'll rust again. So what they're saying is you have to break the bond of that metal to the paint. And the way you do that is to use an alkaline acid neutralizing wash. And what it does is it dissolves the rust, and then it loosens it up, and then you wash the car off, and you've got rid of the process. Even wet sanding won't do it. It'll just take the top surface off. That's why they say don't use clay, even though it appears that it's worked. It is not really removing the entire piece. Excuse me?
Same acid can be used in the windows?
Can clay?
The same acid can be used in the windows?
I'd be very careful. He asked if you could use acid on windows. I would be very careful about using acid on windows. Again, you can get away with it. I've even personally done it when I didn't know better. And I used to clean, we had a window from our office into the wash bay of our, into the wash bay of our detail shop, and I used to take acid and steel wool and clean the window when it would get all mucky, but that's real dangerous to do. You know, the only thing I'm going to be like the manufacturers and just say that I wouldn't use acid on windows in any condition.
Is there a specific product or whatnot to remove the rail dust?
Do what?
To remove rail dust?
Well, that's what we were saying is you want to use the acid that I've heard most used to remove rail dust is oxalic acid. And you buy it in a powder. It's not very expensive. You take a cup of oxalic acid and pour it into a 5-gallon bucket of warm water. And then what most of the fellows that I know that do it, they dip towels in the solution and lay the towels over the flat surfaces of the car and let it sit there until that rust breaks down, and then take it off. Now, I'll caution you, that's the process that I've seen used, that I know is used. A couple of you are shaking your heads that you use it. My chemist said oxalic acid is skull and crossbones. He says it's very, very poisonous stuff and that you shouldn't do it. The Ford Motor Company fellow that helped me with this presentation also said you got to be careful with the use of acid on cars, because you don't know what the acid is going to do with the plastics, with the vinyl covered chrome. There's all sorts of things going on today with cars that we don't know what the products are going to do to them. So again, the simple solution, people, is your chemical companies have products that they call rail dust removers. If you want to be protected, just buy that product. Then you've got recourse. You've got recourse if something happens to the paint finish.
Question.
Yes.
Were you going to go over fallouts versus rail dust then? Or are you saying they're the same thing?
Well, what do you mean by fallout?
Oxidation, rust that gets on outside of rails coming from the railroad.
Okay, well, yeah, I'll talk about that in a moment, okay. We know what this is? Acid rain. Acid rain damage. That's not acid rain, that's acid rain damage. You know, you could have acid snow damage too, by the way. You know, we always refer to that as acid rain, but it's just damage caused by acid rain. But the same thing could happen with snow too. And we'll talk about that. Let me just give you a little quick. Okay, acid rain repairs. Now what he's telling you in that first step that a lot of people in our industry forget, you've got acid on the surface of the car. You've got to neutralize that, or the acid will still be active. In other words, if you don't neutralize that acid and you take a car that's been damaged by acid rain and you buff it out, there's still acid on that car, and if it gets wet again, it's going to activate the acid. So you have to neutralize the acid that's on the car with an alkaline. okay, then the repairs can be a combination of buffing or wet sanding and buffing. Again, use the least aggressive products first. And I've been saying that for years. So I was happy that he used that same point in his statement. Is I don't advocate, now the other thing is, people, I don't advocate the detailers, and I don't teach anybody to wet sand. I personally, I just feel that so many of the people that are going into the business are not qualified to do that. We're only dealing with 1.5 mil of clear, and we're dealing with employees sometimes that don't think. It's hard enough to get them to train them to use a buffer. So I don't, that's my personal opinion. I don't do any wet sanding. I don't train anybody to do any wet sanding because I think it's just too dangerous. And there's plenty of cars out there that we can buff and wax and make a lot of money at and don't have problems with. And most of the time, a guy that comes to you is not going to pay you what it would take to wet sand a car. Now, if you're good and you're a technician, and there's a lot of good people, I'm sure in this room there's people that are very skilled and can do it. And by all means, if you can get your money for it, I would do it, but I don't recommend doing it. So if you've got acid rain damage that needs to be wet sanded, I'd leave it alone. And I'd tell the customer that. We'll try it, we'll try buffing it, but you know, I don't think we're going to get it out. We might get it to look better, but this is severe damage to the paint. Even most body men tell me the good body shop painters will not wet sand clear and then respray it. A good paint man will sand the car right down to bare metal again. Like one guy said, he says, you just can't be sure that you've got every nook and cranny out. And he said, if a guy comes to me and wants a quality repair, I'm not gonna respray clear. I'm gonna repaint the whole car. And I thought that was a pretty good philosophy to take. Okay, this might answer some of the questions I know that are brewing up in your head about polishing. Here's a good question. This comes up a lot. Why are OEM paints softer than 15 years ago? Okay. Going back to the 1980s, the EPA legislated new laws for paint solvent emissions. They had to reduce them, obviously. That's why they quit using lacquer, because lacquer just emitted huge amounts of solvent into the air. So this required a change from low solids paint materials, thinners, to higher solids, thicker. This change created a number of paint application durability and polishing related issues. Now that sounds like a big corporate political answer, doesn't it? What he's admitting to you is that, yeah, paints are probably a little softer than they were a few years ago. And that's the reason why, because they had to change paint technology. Yes. Yeah, I've heard that too. I don't know if it's true or it's not true. You know, I just take the position that if I use the least aggressive method, then I won't cause any problems, you know, because I can't know if a paint is soft or hard and what does that constitute. I really don't think, when you talk about soft paint, I really don't think that you can take your fingernail and push it into a paint finish and have your nail show. I think if you can do that, there's a serious problem with that paint finish. When we talk about softness, it's not softness like that. I mean, clear coats were designed to be durable paint finishes, to put us out of business. You know, the whole point of clear coat paint finishes and paint technology is to make a finish that is shinier, more durable, and needs less maintenance. Well, I mean, that really kind of puts us out of business, doesn't it? But they haven't reached that yet. So, you know, I wouldn't get too worked up about whether a paint is soft or hard. I mean, if you can actually make a mark in it with your fingernail, I think I wouldn't touch that paint. You know, because I think there's something seriously wrong with the paint finish if it's that soft. And you know, again, it could be something that the manufacturer or the aftermarket guy did. What? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Is waxing sealing necessary on systems. How many of you have heard, show of hands, how many of you have heard, oh, I don't need to wax my car, it's got a clear coat paint finish? I find that comes from the salesman. You know, the salesmen really don't know anything. You know, and unfortunately, a lot of people. Well, let's don't pick on them. But you know, see, if you read some of my articles about what you can do as operators in public relations, see, what you've got to do is you've got to get out there and you've got to educate people. You've got to go to the San Jose Auto Dealers Association and ask to be a speaker and go before these guys and tell them what's going on. You got to go to car clubs. I just got invited to speak before the BMW club in Portland. And this is what you can do to improve your own business and to improve yourself, because there's misinformation. You know, the salesmen are a little bit lazy. They don't get into being educated the way they should be educated, and so they're flopping all this stuff out to the people just to get the people to buy. They don't understand the clear coat paint technology, yet people in their dealership really do, but they don't listen and they don't learn. And so when our customers come in, we've got to be able to explain to them. See, now you've got knowledge that you didn't have before, some of you. And that's how you can overcome this. You can kind of chuckle a little bit and then go in through an explanation of the clear coat paint finish to them. And yes, that the idea of this paint finish is to make it so it's durable and less resistant, et cetera, but unfortunately, they haven't perfected it. And that's why you got scratches in your car, and that's why you've got water spotting and so forth, that the paint is not perfect yet. Well, I didn't even talk about that yet. So the benefit of a wax or a sealant is to act as a sacrificial layer. Airborne contaminants must eat through the wax first. Okay, regular washing of the vehicle is highly desirable for paint durability. And paint, what he's saying is that paint systems are tested for durability and gloss retention, simulating 10 years of exposure. So that's what they're trying to get out of a paint system. But it's just like we used to say in the car wash industry, you know, we really should be telling people to wash their cars the first time it rains after 2 or 3 weeks of no rain. LA. What happens in LA? It's smoggy. What do you got up in the air? Industrial, you were talking about industrial contamination. It falls down on the finish of the car, and then it rains. Well, what's all over the car? Acid. You know, acid. And you really need to wash your car after it rains when it's been hot. And again, you need to educate your people about why they need to wash their cars. Here's a question we've addressed already. Can I wax seal a vehicle after a finish repair? Yes, but you've got to wait 60 days before applying any protectant to the paint film. And the reason for that, as I mentioned, is to let the solvent evaporate. Now this is an interesting one, and I haven't had time to look through this. How do you choose a wax or a sealant? Use brands that do not bead. Material should sheet off water, removes contaminants from the vehicle. Our testings indicate that water beading on painted surfaces concentrates the effect of fallout damage. Sealants contain anti-corrosive resins while waxes do not. Now, I'm not sure that that's necessarily true. But is there anybody in the chemical business in here that could answer this question about water sheeting versus beading? I've never seen, in all my years, I've never seen a product that sheets water on the finish of a car. Well, we'll have to look into that next chapter. Maybe I can find out something on that. I used to hear the same thing in the car wash industry, that you wanted cheater wax that made the water sheet rather than bead, but I've never seen water that sheeted on a car that I could get off with an air dryer. So I don't know. How long do I, now here's a different question. How long do I have to wait before waxing my new vehicle? If the vehicle is brand new, it should not be waxed or sealed for a minimum of 21 days. Now, what he's saying then is you can verify when the car was built on the vehicle certification label on the driver's door. Weighting allows the remaining solvents from the paint production process to be dissipated. Trapped solvents may result in hazing, blotching, and discoloration of the surface. So you see, many problems that are brought to your detail shops could be caused from just exactly that problem. And that's what you could create by waxing or sealing over a new paint finish.
Is that repairable? Someone at home buys their new car, waxes it within 3 days, or not thinking about it, comes to us, and we take out that hazing and blotching?
I don't think so. Not as I understand the problem. Yeah, I don't believe that that's repairable. Anybody can help me out on that?
I've seen paint run because it's waxed so far back.
Okay, when can I buff a refinish repair? A new finish can be compounded and polished to remove imperfections after a baking cool down. Polishing is the easiest between 18 and 24 hours after painting. Polishing should be performed using non-silicone body shop-based safe products, and that's what I was talking about. Compounds typically do not have silicone in them, so that's not a problem. But when we get into this area of polishes, swirl removers, we get into this area of what the body shop calls a glaze and what we would call a polish or a swirl remover. Now, somebody had asked me a problem about, earlier, someone over here asked a question about, shoot, what was it? Somebody over here asked me a question, and I said I'd get back to it.
I asked you a question about wheels.
No, this had to do with paint. Oh, how much, why don't the aftermarket people put more paint on the car? Because I'm told if you get your car painted, I questioned our paint supplier. I said, well, if there's only 1.5 mil of clear on the car, then how can I possibly wet sand it? How do these body shop guys wet sand almost every clear coat they spray to get a perfect finish? I mean, geez, wet sanding obviously is going to take a lot more finish off of the car than buffing. And he said, right. He says, but what we do, this was a fellow from Sickens, Asco Sickens. He says, what we do when we teach an aftermarket refinisher to spray, we teach them to overlap as they spray. So what they end up with, if they know that they're going to wet sand the car, then they actually put the equivalent of about, he said, about 2.75 mils of clear on the car. Then they wet sand, and they get down to about the 1.5 to 2 mils of paint, or 1.5 to 2 mils of clear. See, now you don't know, I mean, it's just really hard for us. You don't know if a car's been refinished. You know, if you think it's been refinished, you can take your paint thickness gauge, even the handheld one, and you can generally tell. Because what I found is that even with the little magnetic handheld one, you probably can see, you'll see like 8 mils of paint, and you can go around the car and check and see if you generally won't find 8 mils all over the car. Now, of course, the most accurate way is that this gives you an exact reading, which the magnetic one doesn't. But you can generally tell if a car's been wet sanded and so forth.
What would that do to the UV protection we were talking about earlier?
Well, that's a good question. That's why I questioned what the guy said too. I'll have to ask that. I should have asked him that question. What happens? Well, sure. Yeah, it would seem that would be true. That you'd be taking off the. So sometimes you see, I don't have all the answers, and sometimes we create more questions than we answer in these sessions. But don't let me get away with it now. See, I'm supposed to be a writer, and I'm supposed to provide information. So somebody get after me sometime, and I'll, if I forget, I'll get after that question. That's a good question. Do you know what that is? Swirl. Good. You know what causes swirls? Okay, make it easy. Improper buffing. Okay, surface was not clean before buffing. Pads too aggressive. I've been telling you that all day today. Product used did not maintain the buff film. It dried up too fast. Talked about that earlier this morning. Buffing pad, buffing on edge. That's one of the old guys. Boy, I'm a really whiz banger when I can turn that buffer up on edge. That's all you're doing is swirling the paint. Best way to I saw one of the chemical companies had a great display at one of the car wash detail shows one year. And they took a piece of plexiglass and they had the buffer stand behind the plexiglass, and you were standing out in front, and he put that buffer up on edge and you could just see the swirls. But I love it. In Denver, all of the experienced detailers that I had to deal with there, they all wanted to turn that buffer up on it. That's why they don't like foam pads. That's why the old detailers don't like foam pads, because they can't turn them up on edge. And that really is the surest way to create swirls. The buffing pad, again, worn out. Geez, I mean, I see some pads in shops. I sold my detail shop to one guy, and he's got these black foam pads. They got to be that thick. You know, he just won't throw anything away. And he doesn't buy anything either. In fact, I wonder how he's detailing cars, because he doesn't buy. I mean, I'm sure he's not buying from anybody else, because I sell to him really inexpensively. Pad not clean, classic deal. Wool pads. Guy looks, I got to buff this car. He picks up an old pad. That doesn't look too bad. Slaps it on there, takes the buffing spur, and cleans it. Well, it's all he did and cleaned it. All that 800, 1200, 1500 grit is all still in the pad. Or when they use wool pads, they let them get matted down. Now, I was in Japan one time at their detailing association show. So I'm walking around, and, you know, Mr. Know-It-All, and I'm watching these guys buff. And this guy picks up this buffer, and he's got this wool pad on it, and it's all matted down, just it's got as much wax as you could imagine, and he starts to put it on the finish of this black hood, and I start, no, you know, and he looked at me. You know, the Japanese don't like to get things out of kilter, and I was trying to tell him, you know, that, geez, he shouldn't be buffing with that. He needs to clean it. You know, I was going to give him some good American advice. So we couldn't communicate verbally, but what he was showing me, that he was using this gummed up pad to scratch the hell out of this black hood, so he could then show the process of bringing it back to normal. And I laughed to myself. I thought, God, isn't that great? You know, and here this is something that goes on in every detail shop. And why don't guys, you know, what they're supposed to do, what I teach people that use wool pads is that every time they apply chemical on the car, they spur the pad. Every time. And then if it gets too wet and they don't want to throw the pad away, then get the air chuck and blow it out to keep it wet and fluffy. And you know, even with a foam pad, you know that you got too much chemical or your pad's screwed up when it isn't coming off. If you've taken and buffed and you've spread your chemical out all over the area that you're working on, and then you start to work it to get the shine or the correction, and the chemical keeps staying there, you just turn over your pad and you'll look and it's all gummed up. But if you're going to use wool pads, you've got to use that spur. And guys don't do it because it takes too much time.
They got that new bucket. It's a pad cleaner.
Yeah. There are some automated pad cleaners, or not automated, but, you know, you stick them in. We used to sell it, and I quit selling them because nobody would buy them. We used to manufacture one, actually, an aluminum that would hook up to your sink. It was a hell of a deal. You just stick it in there and it'd wash your pad in about 30 seconds, but nobody would buy them. So we quit selling them. All right, now here's what the man is saying, and I would agree with, is here's how you buff. Soft, clean pad flat on the surface, low speed, watching for what you're doing. A lot of guys buff and they really don't pay attention to what they're doing. They think as long as they just go over the hood, that's all they have to do. Now you laugh about that, but you watch guys buff. They are not watching what they're trying to correct. They're just going over it, and that's going to correct it. See, and that's a mental thing that I've been trying to tell you. Now, if you use airlines, you won't have to worry about the cord being over your shoulder and strangling you to death when you get it caught in the... So correct buffing is all of the above. No, actually, even with airlines, you have to be careful to keep that line off the car. Okay, here's a little bit about pad technology. Now, what we're referring to here as the white cutting pad, 4-ply, 100% wool yarn. I don't have one here, but that's the typical old-style, heavy, aggressive cutting pad. It should be no less than 1.5 inches yarn thickness. It will create excessive heat, But this is the key one, people. Recommended not for OEM clear coats. Now, I don't know how much more can be said to you people in the business when Ford Motor Company is telling you don't use them on our paint finishes. And any good chemical company will tell you the same. I'm telling you the same. They cause swirls. And as I said before, if you are going to use one, you got to clean it with a spur, and you got to clean it the way it should be cleaned. Now, I'll grant you, there's some guys, you know, they say necessity is the motherhood of invention. And there are some guys, as I mentioned this morning, that can really do a job with a cutting pad. But, you know, that's a dying art. And it's just not working smart, it's working hard. So if you want to make life easy for yourself, you know, get the right technologies, the right pad technology and the right chemical technology, and you won't have a lot of problems. Okay, there are some new pads out. The yellow clear coat cutting pad, which is acrylic and wool blend, which is this one here. This will give you the aggressiveness that you're looking for beyond a foam pad, but it won't cause the scratches that you get from this previous pad. They're recommending 1.5 inch yarn thickness. It will produce less heat than the white wool, and you clean it the same way. And we just started using that pad, and it's really been very effective in getting rid of microfine scratches in your new car finishes, or you know, in a good finish, a car that's got a good paint finish on it, but it's got those microfine scratches that you can't seem to get out. With a microfine compound and that yellow pad, you really get some wonderful results. Okay, black foam pad, many variations are available. They create excessive heat if operated above 1200 RPMs. They're recommended for fine polishing, and they remove swirl marks that are caused by wool pads. And I think most of you that are in the business. Now, I will say this, just because they're black, that's a misnomer. He obviously isn't aware of everything that's out there. Not everyone makes their polishing pads in black, although it's becoming sort of a standard. But we have a real good polishing pad that's white. So what you want to say, don't get hung up on colors. You get hung up on the supplier's definition of what's a polishing pad and what's a cutting pad in the foam area. Okay, some buffing tips. Use the correct pad. Use a clean pad. Do not create excessive heat. Always use the least aggressive method first, and never remove more than 0.3 or 0.5 of a mil of clear coat. Now, how you can tell you do that, if you got a paint thickness gauge and you start buffing, then once you've gone over an area, grab your paint thickness gauge again and see how much you've taken off. Okay, here were some things that he added that were kind of interesting. Vehicle concerns that you'll be interested in. Uh-oh. Here we go. We've got all the technical names. Stained fascia. Petroleum distillate dimethyl silicone tire dressing slings off on a flexible part. These dressings will pull the carbon black out of tires and permanently stain flexible plastic parts. So that's the whole point about using water-based versus solvent-based. What I'd like to do in concluding this discussion on paint is just quickly run through some paint finish problems. You know, let you just see them. Pinholing, runs or sags. Now, these are things that you need to be able to identify. The one reason I like this little book, it's $16.95, and all of those, every one of these paint finish problems that I'm going to mention to you are all listed here. It tells you the conditions, the causes, the prevention, and the solution. And boy, it can save you a lot of agony if you're able to identify these problems and not be accused of them. You know, you can do it from a negative, positive point of view, that you can tell a customer, no, I couldn't have caused it. Here's what the problem is. Doesn't that look like this in the picture? See what it says is the cause? That happened in the body shop, not in my shop. And the other side is that on a positive way, the customer comes in, you evaluate the car, you say, this is the problem. Well, what do you mean? You get your trusty book out, you flip to there, you show them exactly what the problem is. I'm not going to run through all of these because there's too many of them, and I know there's some other things that y'all want to talk about, unless you'd like me to. Huh? Well, all right, let's just run through a few of them real quickly then for you. So pinholing and runs and sags are nothing we can do anything about unless we were to wet sand on a sag. But you shouldn't be volunteering to repair a body shop's problem. Pinholing is caused from improper preparation of the surface. Here you've got orange peel, we all know about that, peeling. Orange peel, again, is a problem in application. Should you correct it? That's up to you. I say no. You know, if you want to wet sand, you can do that. That's up to you, but I wouldn't do it. Here we've got lifting and modeling. We see a lot of modeling. I've seen that on cars before. Wrong thinner, materials not uniformly mixed, spraying too wet, everything related to the application of the paint. I mean, it's amazing when you look through this thing, you didn't realize there were that many paint finish problems. Line checking, crazing, they call it, micro checking. I've seen all of those, and I've been accused of causing those because people didn't see them, and we actually, by polishing the car, we bring them out. And so you've got to be able to defend yourself. You've got to be able to defend yourself for these kinds of problems. Chemical staining, cracking, line checking, micro chipping, chemical staining we run into. That's a real simple deal. Let me jump ahead here. I wasn't going to show you this, but I will now, since we're into this sort of thing. Okay, look at this. This tells you, this is a real nice piece of information. It gives you some basic colors on cars. It gives you the spots that might occur, and it tells you what chemical would cause those spots. Now, isn't it interesting that sodium hydroxide is a caustic? Sodium hydroxide is used in some of the cleaners we use. And sodium hydroxide on a non-metallic deep medium blue car will cause whitening and film degradation. On a yellow car, it will cause red spots. On a red card called deep purple. In other words, so we're using chemicals with sodium hydroxide in them, and if we get them on the car, we could be subject to these kinds of spotting. But the more important thing that I found personally was that when a customer comes into your detail shop with spots on the car, you need to be able to identify them. Now, the third column is interesting. It tells you where it comes from. Then this page tells you where those chemicals come from. Fertilizer plants, cement plants, paper mills, and so forth. To me, it's just a neat bit of information that shows your customer how professional you really are. Yes, Bob? This I got some years ago from Sherwin-Williams. So yeah, what I would suggest, if you, I can't even find my printed copy of this anymore, or I'd be more than happy, and I don't know whether I can copy off these Mylars, but, oh, can you? So that means I have to give them to you people. Okay. Well, but if you've got a Sherwin-Williams paint dealer in your area, you might check with them. Blushing or chalking. Water spotting, wrinkling. I know we're going to come back. We're going to come back to. Now, see, I don't agree with this. Compound or polish with rubbing or polishing compound. In severe cases, sand-affected areas and finish. I think that's much too aggressive a process to remove water spotting. And I'll come back to that. Don't let me forget. Solvent popping, sand scratch swelling. Yes? Huh? Solvent popping? What do you want to know? Improper surface cleaning or preparation, wrong thinner or reducer. If the chemical is sprayed or the paint is sprayed too dry, or at excessive pressure, or excessive film thickness. So see, it's strictly a paint application and finish process. Bleeding or blistering. What you'll find as you read through these, almost every one of these problems is caused by something wrong with the paint finish process.
Well, it looks like that's where our video of that ran out. I'm gonna bring Bud back in here. Get you in here, Bud. All right. So, Bud, when was that filmed, and what show was that at?
It was at a Western Car Wash Association Expo in Las Vegas, and I think it was filmed in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Certainly before PowerPoint presentations. I noticed somebody said that. Yeah, I'm amazed at how technology has progressed in such a short time.
Yeah, well, still a cool throwback and still very valid information, though, that you were throwing out there.
Well, that's right. People can complain about, somebody noticed, they say 1990s, 1992. The point is that information is still valid today as it was back then. And there really hasn't been a whole lot of changes in paint technology since that time.
Right. I'd say the one that actually we had a question about, the ceramic coating. I think that's probably been the big step for detailers in terms of protecting the paint. So will a ceramic coat show its, will it even register on one of your paint thickness gauges that you were talking about?
I don't think so. I've never, I don't think the thickness of a ceramic coat is, it's certainly not as thick as a clear coat, and a clear coat's only 1.5 mils. So I don't think that you would know. You can tell. I think if a car is ceramic coated by shooting water on it and watching how the water comes off. I think what I've seen with ceramic coating is that the water tends to sheet rather than bead. It just comes right off the car, and then of course the shine. The shine is almost always greater with a ceramic coating than even a wax or a paint sealant.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, big fan of my ceramic coat on my car. Well, I think that was actually the only question we had in here. Was there any other statements or anything you'd like to leave everyone with?
No, just thank you for the opportunity. And if anybody has any questions, they can contact me directly. I'm on Facebook, and I'm happy to work with them and answer any questions they might have on anything related to detailing, be it paint or anything else.
Awesome. Well, I hope to catch up with you soon in person, either in Vegas or Orlando or Kentucky if you're going down there. But yeah, hope to see you soon. And thank you so much for coming out and doing this.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So that was Bud Abraham. Hope you guys picked up some fun tidbits from that. There's some really great stuff, even if it was awesome going down memory lane with the overhead projectors. So a big thank you to Rag Company for sponsoring this. Also G Technique, Coach Shami, and PNS Detail. So as always,